My mom offered me money to forgive my brother for getting my fiancée pregnant 2 months before our wedding. Instead, I kept the money and decided to let karma do its work. 3 years ago, I was engaged to a woman I'll call Lila. At that time, I truly believed she was the one I would marry. Lila and I had been together for almost 5 years, and our relationship seemed solid. Both of us were lawyers, leading demanding and fast-paced lives, but we always made time for each other. The year I proposed to Lila was supposed to be the happiest of our lives, but things took an unexpected turn. Lila lost her job after being caught violating some company rules. I won't go into the details since it's personal, but the company fired her in a rather humiliating way. If you've ever known a perfectionist workaholic, you'll understand how losing a job can shake them to their core. For Lila, work wasn't just a job. It was her identity, pride, and purpose. Losing it so abruptly devastated her. She immediately began job hunting, sending applications to countless firms and corporations. Unfortunately, her specialized experience made opportunities scarce, especially given the circumstances of her dismissal. Months passed, and she still hadn't found a new position. Throughout this time, I did my best to be supportive. I reassured her not to worry about finances. We were engaged, and I saw it as my responsibility to take care of her during this tough period. Knowing she had a tendency to overthink and stress herself out, I encouraged her to relax and not let the situation consume her. To my relief, she took my advice, or at least tried. With her newfound free time, she decided to pursue a long-held dream, learning landscaping. She enrolled in a local landscaping class and spent her free hours on this new hobby. Coincidentally, my brother Mason was also in that class. Let me tell you a bit about Mason. He's my complete opposite. While I grew up focused on studies and career, Mason was carefree, often getting into mischief. He had a reputation as a womanizer, which followed him through college and beyond. He never stayed with one girl for long and rarely took anything seriously. Lila had met Mason early in our relationship and knew the kind of person he was. So, when she started attending the same landscaping class as Mason, I thought their paths crossing was just a coincidence. In hindsight, that's when things began to change. Over a few weeks, the two of them became surprisingly close. At first, I didn't think much of it. Mason would sometimes offer to pick her up and drop her off at class, which seemed considerate, though unusual. Lila would come home excited, sharing stories about what she and Mason had done in class or showing me photos of their projects. But soon, their interactions extended beyond landscaping. They started going out on weekends, visiting art museums or trying out new restaurants, activities Lila and I usually enjoyed together. Now, she was doing them with Mason instead. Over time, Lila's behavior changed noticeably. She was spending far more time with Mason than I was comfortable with, even canceling our date nights to hang out with him. I'm not the kind to stay silent and let things fester, so one evening, I confronted her directly. I asked point blank if there was something going on between her and Mason. Lila seemed shocked and even offended by my question. She adamantly denied any inappropriate behavior and insisted that her time with Mason was purely platonic. She said it was fun and lighthearted, like hanging out with a younger brother. She seemed genuinely hurt that I would even suggest otherwise. For a moment, I felt guilty for doubting her, but deep down, her explanations didn't fully ease my concerns. Things came to a head just 2 months before our wedding. At that time, I was working tirelessly to handle all our finances. Since Lila had lost her job, I had taken on the full financial responsibility for our household and the wedding. Though she used some of her savings for personal needs, I was carrying the bulk of the load. Between the long hours at work and the stress of planning the wedding, I wasn't as present as I should have been. Looking back, maybe that gave Lila and Mason the chance to grow as close as they did. One night, I arrived home early from a business trip, eager to surprise Lila and spend time with her. As I pulled into the driveway, I immediately noticed my brother Mason's car parked outside. Normally, I wouldn't have thought much of it. Mason had a habit of showing up unannounced. But this time, it was different. It was past 9 p.m., and seeing his car there so late raised a red flag. I walked slowly, stopping at the bedroom door. There they were, Lila and Mason, entwined in the most intimate way imaginable. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't even notice me standing there. Usually I'm calm and composed, but this was a betrayal of the highest order. Without saying a word, I walked into the room. I approached the bed and grabbed Mason by the back of his neck, pulling him away from Lila. The shock on his face was almost satisfying. He turned to look at me, his expression shifting instantly from confusion to terror. I didn't even glance at Lila. Mason began stammering apologies, but his words meant nothing to me. I punched him square in the nose, the crack of bone giving me a grim satisfaction as blood started pouring from his face. He cried out in pain, but I wasn't done. I hit him again and again, each punch landing harder than the last. Blood dripped from his nose, staining his shirt, but I didn't care. Mason stumbled backward, trying weakly to block my blows, but I kept going. When he was on the floor, bloodied and begging me to stop, I turned my attention to Lila. She sat on the bed, trembling and sobbing. I looked her straight in the eyes and told her she had 10 minutes to get out of my house. I warned her that if she didn't, I wouldn't hesitate to leave her in the same bloody state as my brother. She started pleading, apologizing over and over, saying she could explain, begging me not to throw her out and to give her a chance to fix things. But I wasn't interested in her excuses or apologies. I glanced at my watch and said coldly, "You have 9 minutes." The tone of my voice and the look in my eyes must have told her I wasn't joking, because she scrambled out of bed, her hands shaking as she started dressing. Tears streamed down her face as she grabbed a suitcase from the closet and began packing whatever she could. When she was done, dragging her half-filled suitcase down the stairs, she turned to me one last time. Her voice was broken as she begged me to listen, saying she loved me and deserved a chance to explain. Without a word, I took her engagement ring off her finger and shoved her toward the door. She tried to resist, pleading with me to reconsider, but I'd had enough. I opened the door and pushed her out into the night. She stood on the porch, still crying and begging for forgiveness, but I didn't look back as I slammed the door in her face. Mason, still bloodied from our fight, sat slumped on the floor. Despite my rage, I didn't want to do anything worse to him, so I called my parents and told them everything. My dad was furious with Mason, and my mom was in shock, but they both said they'd come over immediately. When they arrived, my mom, a nurse, tended to Mason's wounds. Thankfully, they were mostly superficial. Meanwhile, my dad took me to the backyard to calm me down, seeing that my hands were still trembling with anger. Later, Mason joined us in the yard with my mom. His face was bruised, his nose bandaged, and blood still stained his shirt. He apologized for betraying me, claiming he never meant for things to happen this way. But then, he dropped a bombshell. He said he was in love with Lila. Furious, I finally turned to look at him. He continued explaining how he thought Lila felt the same way about him. He assured me it was the first time they'd slept together, as if that somehow made it better. Then he pulled out his phone and showed me their messages, conversations full of flirtation, secrets, and Lila's confessions about how unhappy she was in our relationship. According to Mason, she had invited him over that night, thinking I would still be away on my business trip. As I read those messages, my anger began to boil again. Mason kept talking, apologizing for betraying me, but also insisting that he had never felt this way about anyone else before. He said he couldn't stop himself and begged me to forgive him. My dad, who had been listening silently, finally had enough. He told Mason he was lucky if he didn't do to him what I had done to his house. My mom, however, reacted differently. Mason had always been her favorite, and I could see how much she was struggling with the situation. She started telling me that no matter what I decided to do about Lila, I needed to forgive my brother. She said he seemed genuinely remorseful and that brothers shouldn't be divided over a woman. She even offered me money to cover the wedding expenses, but when I told her I was willing to accept her check but not her advice, she withdrew the offer. I cut her off and told my parents I wasn't in the mood for lectures or advice. All I wanted at that moment was for them to take Mason and leave. I couldn't bear to see him anymore. My dad nodded, understanding that I needed space, and helped Mason into the car. My mom hesitated, clearly wanting to stay and mediate, but she eventually followed. In the weeks that followed, I was still dealing with the fallout. Lila had been sending me messages constantly, begging for forgiveness and trying to explain herself. But her explanations always revolved around the same tired excuses, ones that echoed what Mason had already said. She claimed that neither of them had ever intended to hurt me. I ignored the messages for an entire week. Then, out of nowhere, I got a phone call from Mason. He told me that he and Lila had just found out she was pregnant, and the baby was his. He said that because she was expecting his child, he wanted to marry her and was asking for my blessing, something I absolutely refused to give. My mom's reaction only made everything worse. She had already been trying to mediate between Mason and me, but now she seemed to view Lila's pregnancy as some kind of divine intervention. She told me it was God's plan for Lila to get pregnant like this, and that maybe Mason and Lila were always meant to be together. It was as if she was trying to justify the unimaginable, excusing what they had done because it fit her new fantasy of becoming a grandmother. I told my mom point blank that I knew exactly what she was doing, and if she decided to side with Mason and Lila, our relationship would be over. I wasn't joking. My brother's betrayal was bad enough, but having my own mother defend him was something I couldn't accept. My dad tried to stay neutral, maybe thinking it would help ease the tension. Still, my mom offered Lila financial support, assuring her that she and the baby would be well taken care of. But of course, there was a condition. My mom insisted that Mason and Lila had to get married. That was what Mason wanted as well. Mom was relentless in her pursuit of this outcome, refusing to even consider the idea of her grandchild being born out of wedlock. When I found out that Mason and Lila were actually going to get married and had started sending out wedding invitations to our relatives, I felt furious and humiliated. Without further discussion, I kept my word and cut both my mom and Mason out of my life. But my mom wasn't one to give up easily. For weeks after the fallout, she called me nonstop, left voicemails, and even showed up at my door uninvited, trying to guilt me into reconciling. It was suffocating. That's when I realized the only way to escape her was to leave town entirely. It's been 3 years since they destroyed my life. I moved to a new city and cut ties with almost everyone in my family except for my dad. He respected my decision to move and understood why I needed the distance, though it saddened him that I no longer visited. In these 3 years, I've rebuilt my life piece by piece. I didn't share my new number with anyone but my dad. I made new friends, found a sense of normalcy again, and worked hard to leave the past behind. So imagine my shock when, just yesterday, I found Lila at my door, ringing the bell. When I opened the door, I barely recognized her at first. She looked nothing like the woman I once loved. She seemed sick or like she'd been through a lot in this time. She was standing there, holding the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 years old. The child had Mason's sharp features, leaving no doubt about who her father was. I wondered why she was here. How had she found me? What did she want? Finally, I broke the silence. "Lila, what are you doing here?" She was crying as she begged me to let her in, saying she had something important to discuss with me. My first instinct was to say no and send them back, but then I looked at the little girl beside her, staring at me with those wide, innocent eyes. I couldn't be rude in front of the child, so I stepped aside and gestured for them to come in. I showed them to the couch and offered them some water. Once they settled in, I sat down across from them and asked, "What are you doing here?" I already knew she wouldn't have found me on her own. I hadn't given my address to anyone except my dad, and I trusted him to keep it secret unless something truly important came up. So, what was so urgent that he gave away my location? Instead of answering immediately, Lila reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. She handed it to me without a word. I opened it and instantly recognized my mother's handwriting. Her letter was blunt. She said it was my responsibility to clean up the mess Mason had made. She explained how Lila and Jesse were struggling, how Mason had abandoned them, and how, as Mason's brother and Jesse's uncle, I was obligated to help them. She also reminded me that Lila was the woman who almost became my wife and that Jessie was my niece. I looked at Lila, confused and angry. "What is this supposed to mean?" I asked. That's when Lila broke down and started telling me everything. According to her, Mason had been unfaithful throughout their marriage, even after Lila gave birth to their daughter, Jessie. My brother continued having affairs during their entire relationship. Lila, for her part, had tried to make things work, hoping they'd improve over time, if only for Jessie's sake. But 3 months ago, Mason abruptly packed his things and left. No explanation, no note, no warning. He simply disappeared. Since then, Lila had been on her own. She had no job, no savings, and no home. She and Mason had been living in a rented house, and without him, she couldn't afford to stay. My mother, feeling some sort of obligation to Jessie, had been giving Lila money to support them. But now, with Mason seemingly gone for good, my mom had decided she no longer wanted to take responsibility for Lila and Jessie. Lila continued, saying my mom expected me to take care of her and Jessie since they had nowhere else to go. I felt utterly repulsed by what she was asking, and by how ridiculous it was that both she and my mother expected me to help. My mom had not only taken Mason's side during the initial betrayal, but was now trying to shift the consequences of his actions onto me. Her relentless favoritism toward Mason was showing itself yet again. I told Lila, quite bluntly and in front of her daughter, that she had no right to expect any help from me. Jessie wasn't my child. Lila was no longer my fiancée. And this wasn't my responsibility. While I felt bad that Mason had abandoned her, she should have seen it coming. He's never been reliable or responsible. I refused to let myself be manipulated into helping. So, I asked Lila to leave. She started crying, saying she had nowhere to go, no money, and that she had spent what little she had left on gas to get to me. In the end, I gave her enough money to fill her gas tank before asking her to leave. Update 1. I want to address a few points. My mom's behavior in this situation is just as baffling to me as it may seem to others. Her attempts to guilt-trip me into helping Lila and her daughter after everything that's happened strike me as incredibly selfish. I understand she might feel some obligation because of her granddaughter, but it's unreasonable for her to expect me to clean up the mess left behind by her golden child. Especially considering how things turned out. I was the one betrayed. If my mom wants to have a favorite child, that's her choice. But she should also take responsibility for him. I also agree with some of the comments about my dad. He betrayed me too, albeit in a different way. Instead of giving me the support I needed after everything that happened, he chose to stay neutral. Sure, he scolded my brother at one point, but he never fully took my side. By failing to challenge my mom's manipulative behavior, he also played a role in this betrayal. I plan to have a conversation with him about it soon. Yes, it's true that Mason left Lila, but that doesn't make it my responsibility to take care of her. Lila made her own decisions, and while I can feel some sympathy for her given the circumstances, I don't owe her anything. The fact that she showed up at my door with nothing but a sad story and a child in tow only highlights her desperation. I didn't turn her away out of spite. I simply made it clear that fixing what Mason broke is not my job. I am not obligated to care for her just because she's in a tough spot now. That child is most definitely not mine. Lila and I broke up weeks before she got pregnant, and by the time we ended things, we hadn't been intimate in quite a while. The timeline is crystal clear. There's absolutely no chance I'm the father. There's no need for a test or anything like that. On top of that, Jessie has all of Mason's traits. His face, his eyes, his smile. It's like seeing Mason as a kid. There's no doubt in my mind that Mason is her father. A paternity test isn't necessary because the resemblance is undeniable. That little girl is Mason's daughter, and I refuse to get dragged into any more confusion about it. No, I don't want to adopt my niece. I can't believe some of you are even suggesting it. Regardless of Lila's financial or emotional situation, she is the mother, and she is responsible for her child. I don't understand why she never worked after getting married or why she didn't save anything. Mason is the father, so even if they're separated, it's Mason and Lila who need to step up and take responsibility for their daughter. Mason doesn't have a choice. He has to pay child support. Update 2. I confronted my parents about everything. I already knew my dad had given Lila my address, but I wanted to hear it directly from him. I called him and asked, point blank, why he agreed to share my location with her after I had repeatedly asked him not to. I also asked what exactly he expected me to do for Lila and her daughter after all these years. My dad was silent for a moment, clearly uncomfortable. Then he let out a deep sigh and apologized. "I'm sorry, son. I really am," he said. "We did everything we could to help Lila, but with Mason gone for so long, there was only so much we could do. Your mom begged me to give her your address. She thought that maybe if you saw her after all this time, you might want to help her in some way since she has nowhere else to go." My frustration surged. I asked him, "Why on earth would you think I'd want to help someone like her? She betrayed me with Mason, hurt me, and now you want me to help her?" He admitted that he understood why I was angry and explained that neither he nor my mom wanted things to end up this way. But to them, Lila and her daughter were now part of the family, and they believed I was their only option. He apologized again, but I wasn't having it. I told him flatly that we were done. I had trusted him to be different from my mom, but he turned out to be just like her, a backstabber. Did they really think I would forget the past, welcome Lila and my brother's child into my life, and start taking care of them? It hit me hard to realize that my parents genuinely didn't care about me. I told my dad firmly and without hesitation to lose my number and forget I ever existed. Since he already knew my address, I warned him that if he or my mom showed up at my house, I would call the police. He tried to apologize again, begging me to listen, but I wasn't interested anymore. "Don't call me again," I said. "Just don't. You made your choices, and I'm making mine. If you hope to get one last word in, that's too bad for you." I hung up the phone and immediately blocked his number. What my dad did is unforgivable. There's no going back from this. Update 3. It's been nearly a month since my last update. With the help of a friend, I was finally able to track down Mason. As it turns out, Lila was right. Mason has been living with his latest fling in a nearby town, pretending he has no responsibilities, as if he doesn't have a family. Honestly, I'm not surprised. That's been his way of life for as long as I can remember. I still can't believe this is the same guy who, 3 years ago, looked me in the eye and claimed he was in love with Lila. The same guy who turned my life upside down. And now, after all that, when he got bored of Lila and their daughter, he moved on to someone else. Lila knew this about him. She knew what kind of person my brother was and still chose to betray me with him. So no, I don't feel sorry for her. It's like being told something is hot and touching it anyway. You're going to get burned. After finding out where Mason was, I sent the address to Lila. I didn't want to get dragged into her drama any further, but I also didn't want to abandon a child who didn't ask to be born to such irresponsible parents. I gave her one final piece of advice. You need to hire a lawyer and file for divorce and child support. Do it now, before Mason disappears again. Lila thanked me, and I could hear the relief in her voice. She apologized again, just like she had countless times before, but I wasn't interested in hearing it anymore. I'm done. I sent her a text message to make my stance crystal clear. Do not contact me again. Don't show up at my door. This is the last thing I will ever do for you. Whatever we had, if it ever meant anything, ended a long time ago. Leave me in peace for good. I've made it clear that I want her out of my life. This chapter is officially closed. Update 4. To explain this update, I need to provide some context about my brother. He never finished college and has been living off temporary jobs ever since. At one point, he was taking a landscaping class because he hoped to find work in that field. However, the kind of jobs he usually takes allows him to avoid being tied down to any one place. If you've read my previous posts, you probably know where this is heading. Yes, my brother has moved, or more accurately, he's fled. Apparently, he found out Lila was planning to sue him for child support, and his first reaction was to run away. He left his girlfriend's house, and when Lila went there to confront him, she was told he had already moved out. The girlfriend claimed she didn't know where he went, but whether that's true or just a lie, no one can say for sure. I found all this out because Lila emailed me. She wanted my help tracking him down again. I reminded her that she had betrayed me once more by breaking my request not to contact me. So no, I told her, I wouldn't help her. My parents also betrayed me, again. After my dad apologized, both of them showed up at my house, uninvited. I won't bore you with the details of what they wanted. You can already guess. They tried to convince me to take care of Lila and my niece. I told them to their faces that I wouldn't spend another cent on that woman, especially after wasting so much money on a wedding that never happened, a loss they were perfectly fine with back then. Here's the kicker. My mom said she'd be willing to return part of the money if I agreed to take care of Lila and my niece. I told her that if she was ready to write a check right then and there, I might consider thinking about whether it was worth deciding to even consider taking Lila back, which translates to highly unlikely. She hesitated, but eventually wrote me a check for $1,000. That doesn't even cover a quarter of the wedding costs, but hey, it's better than nothing. I told them to leave, reminding them that the check didn't include a promise not to call the police if they showed up again. They left quickly. I thought long and hard, about 5 seconds, on whether I should use my time to consider Lila, and the answer was an emphatic no. I probably spent more time depositing the check than making that decision. The good news? The check cleared. I called my mom to let her know, and she wasn't happy. She argued that since I'd taken her money, I should at least follow through on what I promised. But there was no promise. Even if I had signed a contract, the check was just for me to consider it. I've already spent more time thinking about this than it's worth. If the check had been larger, maybe I'd have thought about it for a few more seconds, but the result would have been the same. Not happening. My mom made a bad move trying to manipulate someone with a legal background who also happens to feel deeply betrayed. Update 5. Now my mom wants her money back. I told her she's welcome to sue me if she thinks she has a legal case. There's no written agreement, no text messages, nothing. Even if she recorded our call where I told her my decision, there's no mention of accepting Lila in exchange for money. Honestly, it'd be an amusing court case. Plus, there's always the possibility of a countersuit on my end. Meanwhile, my brother has resurfaced, and Lila has finally managed to serve him with the legal papers. Guess who Mason wants to represent him? That's right, me. Good luck to him finding someone to work for free because I'm not taking the case. He doesn't have money, and I have no interest in helping him. As for Lila, good luck to her getting anything meaningful out of Mason. If financial security was what she wanted, maybe she shouldn't have chosen someone like him.